visiting your local independent bookstore and purchasing a copy of this absolutely unforgettable collection. So here's the way tonight will work. I have the privilege tonight of introducing Jenny this evening, and after her reading, she and I will be in conversation together up here on the stage. Following the Q&A, Jenny will be right down there where the poets go to sign books. There at the purple tablecloth. And she'd be more than happy to sign one for you. And then also, if you want to just come up and say hello, Jenny would love to meet you as well. Just a few other quick announcements. Thank you, as always, to Tom for streaming tonight's event. English 112, QR codes. It's going to work tonight. I've thought of little else since the last failure. This one, I grew in a lab. We've tried it out many times. They will be posted after the reading. They'll be plentiful. They will work. And then if for some reason you yourself are having trouble in terms of getting signed into the system, Emma will also have a hard copy of the attendance sheet for you, but there shouldn't be any problem. There shouldn't be any problem. It's National Poetry Month. We have a lot of events this month, so I wanted to tell you about them. And this takes us actually to the end of our season, which is also astonishing. Yeah. So next week, April 8th, back-to-back poetry readings on Tuesdays. Tiana Clark, the amazing Tiana Clark, will be here reading from her brilliant new collection, Scorched Earth. And Tiana will be in conversation that evening with the one and only Ocean Vuong. That's going to be an amazing reading and conversation. So please come back for that and join us for that. On Tuesday, April 22nd, I hope everyone in Yona Harvey's capstone knows this. You all will be reading. The students in Yona Harvey's class will be reading Tuesday, April 22nd, right here in Weinstein. That is always one of our favorite events of the year. Please come. If you can, support your fellow students, support the amazing Smith poets who are here. I'm really looking forward to that event. And then our last event of the season on Tuesday, April 29th, Patrick Rosal will be here reading for us. And he will be in conversation with Oliver de la Paz. That's going to be amazing. Again, reading and conversation. So I hope you all can join us for that as well. If you're not yet on our, if you're not yet on our mailing list for some reason, you should, you can think about joining our mailing list by just signing up in the back or scanning the QR code that's there at the intern table in the back. And now it is my absolute pleasure to introduce the amazing Jenny George. Yeah, you get an applause already. She hasn't even done anything yet, but all right, yeah. So after Jenny George visited Smith College in spring of 2019, one student perfectly summed up the campus's response to her reading with this very memorable line. Jenny George, the student proclaimed, should decide who gets into heaven. Because I've known Jenny for so long, I feel as if I could speak for her and say that unfortunately for all of us, serving as an afterlife gatekeeper is not something she'd be interested in or even feel worthy of. But here's the thing, Jenny George, your modesty and reluctance to take on that role is all the more reason why you're the best candidate for the position. For the time being, until we can convince her otherwise, I can tell you that Jenny lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and serves as program coordinator for the Hidden Leaf Foundation, a Buddhist-based social justice organization. She is the author of two truly extraordinary, full-length collections of poetry, The Dream of Reason and After Image, both of which were published by Copper Canyon Press. I'll just tell you, I was just out at a writers' convention in LA. Jenny George, everyone knows her, and she is so beloved in the poetry community, and those books are the stuff of legend already. So now Jenny's blushing and mad at me, but she's thrown me under the bus so many times since she's been here, so it's all good. Both of her full-length collections were published by Copper Canyon Press, and then Jenny and I also co-authored together a forthcoming chapbook of poems titled We Are Not Where We Are, which is a chapter-by-chapter erasure of Henry David Thoreau's Walden. Jenny has been the recipient of numerous awards, including a Discovery, Boston Review Poetry Prize, and fellowships from the Dorothy Sargent Rosenberg Fund, the MacDowell Colony and Yaddo. So Jenny's bio is the easy part. trying to adequately convey the immense wisdom and deeply moving workings of her latest collection, After Image, is a decidedly more complex affair. Let me start with a moment from an interview with Jenny in which, by coincidence, she described employment that she's actually willing to take on. My job, Jenny declared, is the human job of waiting and listening. And language is just what poets use, like wind chimes, to catch the sound of the larger, more essential thing. Wind chimes themselves are not the point. The point is the wind. My reason for evoking these lines is not their inherent beauty or how perfectly they encapsulate Jenny's use of poetry as a tool to interrogate the ways we move through the world, but rather to situate them within the urgency at the heart of the poems in After Image. In the opening stanza of Ars Poetica, a poem that, its title makes clear, explores what the task of poetry needs to be, a death transpires, and the speaker watches the face of her love become, quote, a stone under the surface of a bright, transparent stream. In the stanzas which follow, the speaker describes the changes transpiring in that room, the light, the chill in the air, before a new and commanding voice takes over the poem, which is that of language itself. Describe this, the language said, as the sudden snow began. There is, on the one hand, the human job of waiting and listening for the wind that might stir some words. And then, on page after page in Jenny's latest collection, there is a fierce and propelling need to contend with the overwhelming fact of death and an unimaginable loss. All of the poems in After Image refute any easy solace and instead grapple with the irresolvable complexities of grief and what it means, as the speaker puts it in one poem, to have a beloved you become a not you. The poem After Image describes a photo of a woman wearing a white dress under a blooming apricot tree, before the speaker describes a remembered moment in which the woman clutches the speaker's arm in the night, asking, what is going to happen? Trying to understand what has happened and what is going to happen in the myriad ways in which the speaker's world has forever changed in the wake of such a loss, as well as knowing the inevitability of a partner's death, is the momentous task of these poems. If some of the images in this collection swerve into the surreal, that seems to serve as a means of contending with what is otherwise impossible to understand. She died, the speaker states bluntly in one poem, but not before also stating, matter of fact, that the trees are full of eyes, meaning that a flock of birds are roosting in the elms during a solar eclipse, which, like the speaker, has upended an ability to navigate this world. How could you be dead? The speaker asks in a poem that's set during a snowstorm, before describing the very air we breathe as, quote, a world of cold white bees. I don't know of any collection of poems that, through its meticulous craft, tonal variants, refutations of consolation, and interrogations of language, says more about loss and grief than Jenny George's After Image. It's a book that's utterly devastating, utterly beautiful, and utterly profound. And these are poems I know that I'll be reading for the rest of my life. We are so lucky to have her back on campus. Please welcome Jenny George.
Matt, thank you for saying such kind things about me. You know when someone just pays very close attention to your work, that feels like being loved. It's really nice. I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you for joining me tonight. And I've been on campus for a couple days now, and I just love it here. Like I've been meeting with students and visiting classes. I'm so impressed with how you all are engaged and just like asking good questions and having great conversations with each other and dignifying each other's perspectives, and it's been a real honor to get to be part of that for a couple days, so I'm really happy to be here. How's my sound? Am I coming through okay? A little, I gotta get right up in there. Yeah, that's a life lesson, yeah, okay. Okay. So I'm gonna read from my new collection, and as Matt alluded to, the poems come from an experience I had of intimate loss. And for that reason, it's especially meaningful to get to be in this room with you and to share in person. It's always great to come together in person around literature. But for me, given the nature of this book and the trajectory of that project, it's just like, it's extra special, to get to be together, and thank you for listening. So I'll read a number of poems, and I'm just going to read them in the order that they occur in the book, not too much skipping around. This is the first poem in the collection, and it's called Quantum. A table, and on it a vase of flowering quince branches. But a table is only a joke the gods are making, continuous motion disguised as permanence, as a place, something to set a vase on, something you can wipe with a cloth. The body is not a place. You learned this when her body became a sound your voice was trying to make. Like the orchard in spring, frenzied with humming bees, ferrying the gold grains from tree to tree, the endless sexual material. What you think is form is just a kind of trembling. Oh no, you mustn't clap in between poems. It makes poets very nervous. You can clap at the end, I promise. This next poem is called Eclipse, and it takes the features of a total solar eclipse and sort of transposes those features onto a personal experience I had. So you'll hear that overlay. Eclipse. All the birds are ill. They flood the elms, driven to roost by a noontime dusk. The trees are full of eyes. One body blots out another body. Isn't that how it works? She died. It floats on my vision like a burn, hands folded like a bride, dark cave of the mouth open, as if a great sound were being drawn in. We were very tired. We covered her in flowers as she cooled. The crescent of her foot hung off the bed. Now the birds are quelled, disturbed and quiet. A strange hour of silk descends. They settle in the trees, if not to sleep, then to obey the dark. Black butterflies. Before the two men from the mortuary touched her body, they put their hands into black silk gloves. 4 black butterflies stood on the white bedsheet. 4 black butterflies wove the sheet into a chrysalis around her. They rested lightly on her, a giant mother, pulsing slowly, signaling to one another with silent wing beats. Then the butterflies carried the bound form out into the bright, etherizing light of late spring. I thought, this is what life does. It bears away the damaged and the dead. Now, she is in the world in a new way, like a baby drained of all suffering. Now, when I sleep, from time to time, my eyes flicker open. Black iridescent creatures hover over them, drinking the warm, heavy drops upwelling from the source. So while I was working on these poems, I found the structure of the Orpheus and Eurydice myth as a kind of helpful scaffolding to think through some of my own experiences. So I wrote a number of poems in the voices of Orpheus and Eurydice. So those persona poems, which are kind of like half those mythological voices and of course half my own voice, because even when we're writing persona poems, right, we're always writing our own poems. So there's some poems in the voice of Orpheus in the collection and some in the voice of Eurydice. And I'll read one of those Eurydice poems now, and it's just called Eurydice. It snowed the day I died, a freak spring storm. It was in the papers. A whole year of fruit was lost, each snowflake traveling down from space to touch a blossom with its cold crystal. Now it's nearly spring again, and inside the house, the one I married is forcing quince branches in a jar of warm water. Oh, to be chosen, given a vessel, shaped by another's strictures and desire. In the end, what do any of us want? Having been woken early, brought into the human world and made to respond, the little buds swell with their new circumstance. The air is dense with invisible paths. That shock of fullness, that's called life. That stab of light is the morning sun. Kitchen shears. Afterward, I cut the t-shirt off her. I used the kitchen shears, which previously had been used to make lengths of rosemary as a bed for fish. I cut the shirt crookedly, not from haste, but because my hands were executing an entirely new gesture. Cloth came free at her throat. Outside, a low cloud cover had gathered. I wrapped a fresh sheet around her. I folded her hands on her chest, where they hardened, a plate of armor against the living. So I mentioned the Orpheus and Eurydice myth, which does run through the collection as a theme. And using that mythology was helpful for me because I do think that, like, in times of extreme human experience, the gods do come alive in us. Like, there's an archetypal dimension to extremity, right? And so I believe that to be true, and I wrote poems that I hoped called that into being. But then another thing is also true. Like, alongside that, like, archetypal aliveness, also, I think, just these blobs, right? We're just these, like, fragile bozos moving through life. Or I should speak for myself. I am a fragile bozo. And so to bring that truth into the collection, I wrote a number of poems about a person named Jenny George, who is not at all a mythological character, but just like a person who is just humiliatingly human. And so there's a few poems in the book that are called Jenny George, and this is one of them. And the title runs right into the first line. Jenny George is a failure in the garden. Wherever she makes a hole, the earth slides back in urgently. Seeds won't sprout for her. They won't produce their yellow tongues. There's just a voice saying, "No, I refuse to be born out of nothing." Even so, she keeps making the dark trenches. Ants overcrowd the buds of her peonies. Everything is on its knees. A small wind deranges the serviceberry. Someone should help Jenny George. When the sun goes behind the hills, there will be no one left who knows who she is. Oh, or sap. This next poem is called The Kindnesses of Death, and it's a list poem. I was trying to imagine the aspects of being dead that could be a relief, a kindness. So yes, essentially just a list of those imaginings. The kindnesses of death. First, that nothing touches you. No silks unnerve your skin. No sunlight splashes your empty face. Next, that you cannot hear the separations in the cries of birds. At last, all things stop changing. The wind stays undisturbed in its enclosure. No hour grows long with awful feeling. That others are released from love. No one has to bathe you now like a worn-out child. The kindnesses fall down on you like steady snow, under which you always neither sleep nor don't. Sunflowers. I'm in the world, but I still want the world. I'm full of longing and can't move, enthralled in the garden. Having died all the way back to the root, I grow again into a version of the thing I love. I'm her and not her, hermaphrodite with a heart like a plate full of black flames. The bees inspect me like doctors. All my hard little tears, future selves who haven't grown. Bedclothes swell on the line, and around me, giant sunflowers burn through their masks of radiant desire. The title of this next poem is Vivarium, and a vivarium is like an enclosure for life, the way that like an aquarium is an enclosure for aquatic life, or a terrarium is a little enclosure for terrestrial life. Vivarium is like the largest version of that category. So it's a little box in which life is going on. So this is the poem Vivarium. Some people collect dirt from significant places, or spoonfuls of cloudy ocean inside jars. Like amateur naturalists, they keep these treasures permanently on a shelf. Of course, an amateur is simply a person who loves, who brings love to bear on a particular subject. Returning from one trip, I failed to bring back a jar of anything. I stood outside my house where white stitches of snow were dissolving into the ground beneath the evergreens. An unset moon floated over the trees. If I stand very still, I do no further harm. I am a tiny theater of non-harming. My breath watches raptly, sees how everything is still alive. This poem is called Here, the kind of here that means right here, H-E-R-E, here. A moth is desiccating on our bedroom windowsill, over days becoming freed of its luster, its moon oils turning to a kind of powder bound together by duration. The house is silent. 1 year dead, you are far away somewhere with your new gift. I wait on our bed, the curtains moving slightly as if from a hand. Evening comes on. Where does it hurt? They ask. Where specifically? The artist. A snake lies in the open, dormant in its sleeve of heat. A gilded orphan on the sun-warmed dirt, eye slits ajar, waiting for the infinite to arrive. You want to strike it with a stick. You want an answer to the prayer that says, "Make use of me." One day, the old life simply sheds its dress and flows through the stones. Then the future wavers up in you and stands in your throat like a flame. So I'll read one of the Orpheus poems. This poem is called Orpheus Ascending, and I'm so happy to get to read it here because I wrote it in response to a piece of art from the permanent collection of the museum here. So I got invited to participate in a project that the Poetry Center was putting out of poems in response to pieces from the Smith College Museum of Art. And it was so cool to get to go, well, first of all, it was very cool to look at art in a new way, like to look at it to see, oh, you know, which one of these things do I want to be in conversation with? Like, what am I called to talk to in this museum? And then also, I got to go down like into the stacks. Like, what's the stacks version of a museum? Yeah, into the storage and like see, and to poke around and see like, okay, which one is for me? Like, which one of these works is calling me to talk to it? And I found a sculpture by Louise Nevelson, which is called Orpheus Ascending, and it's an abstract sculpture. It almost looks like a black wooden violin case sort of opened, so it sort of seems like wings, and there's different sort of like abstract inlays. I loved the relationship between the kind of emotional abstraction and then this Orpheus story, and the idea of Orpheus ascending up out of the earth that was captured in this like unusual kind of gloomy but beautiful abstract sculpture. And so that commission was what got me started working on Orpheus poems and then opened into sort of further exploration. So it feels wonderful to get to share this here. So this is the poem Orpheus Ascending, and it has 4 little sections, and I'll just pause between the sections. A crack appeared. Beyond it, snow was pouring through the spring sunlight. A bright, dry snow, like particles of unearthly metal. I emerged, and the earth closed after me, keeping her inside. the way an instrument case will seal shut around its black music? Or was I the instrument? Or was it not music, but pain singing from the depths? Above ground, the peonies were smothered in snow, bent beyond their weight with ice white. The bare root apple couldn't hold and snapped. I kept looking back to where the bed stood, stripped like a table. Then came the smack of snowmelt off the eaves, the house weeping and shining under fresh sun. Every water bucket brimmed. The garden rinsed, dismantled, breathed out a new green. And with all the windows open, through the space came the sound of, what were they? Meadowlarks? Days elapsed, years. I still live in our little house by the orchard, sited so the setting sun illuminates the garden, the bubbling fountain like a fountain of fire in the final moments before night draws across its lid. Then absolute quiet, even the wind resting in the trees. We on Earth, how can we know how long the silences will be between the movements? I wait for song to grow in me across the dark interval. And the last poem I'll read is a poem called Tin Bucket. I was thinking about a particular quality of time that can happen at the end of life when you're caring for someone, and there can be a stage where there's no longer anything to do that might save the person. There's just like a being there with them that's possible. And that time can be uncomplicated, not painless, but like pared down. And so I was thinking about that quality of time and trying to capture it. And so I wrote this poem, Tin Bucket, which is a short poem. I've now talked about the poem for longer than it will take me to read it. This is the, the little poem, Tin Bucket. The world is not simple. Anyone will tell you. But have you ever washed a person's hair over a tin bucket, gently twisting the rope of it to wring the water out? At the end of everything, dancers just use air as their material. A voice keeps singing, even without an instrument. You make your fingers into a comb. For listening. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Can you all hear us in the back?
And how about me? Am I coming through okay? Thank you.
Jenny George, thank you for that incredible reading. That was really beautiful. Thank you so much.
Wonderful to get to share it with you and you all.
Well, thank you so much for your poems. I have a lot of questions for you.
Let's get to it.
Okay. All right. So I do want to just leap in because you've obviously, these poems are contending with loss and grief and death in all kinds of myriad ways. But you, in both conversations that I've heard and interviews, have talked about them not being elegies. And so I wondered if you would just talk about that distinction in terms of the literary tradition of the elegy versus what you feel like these poems are doing.
Right. So I guess I think, am I on okay? Yes. I guess I think of elegy, the project of the elegy, as being in relationship to what's not, like being in relationship to absence or loss. And I was trying to be in relationship to presence more than absence, I guess I would say. And there's a technical thing in writing poetry, and the students here might know what I mean. Sometimes it's hard to write about what's not the case, because as soon as you're talking about it, that it's sort of there in the poem. Like if you said the ground was bare, there was no grass. Like what the deep mind hears is ground, grass. You know what I mean? Like it's hard to describe a thing that's not the case in a poem. So I think I was curious about how to bring presence, like maybe even like hyper-presence, into the poem as a way of putting what's there like on the margin of what's not there or something, so that the focus would be on presence rather than absence. And I guess I think of elegy as having an allegiance to absence, or an allegiance to what's not the case anymore. So I was interested in like the presentness of like the physical reality that happens around a loss. Also the kind of like present tense that is the tense of like shock. You know how like when something is shocking, it's kind of like keeps on happening, almost like in real time. It keeps being true over and over again. So I was interested in that kind of present tenseness, and then also in a sort of, like how do you talk about loss by talking about what actually is there? That was an interesting paradox to me. And then I guess I would say, okay, sometimes in life, terrible things happen, and that is the narrative. And important good art is made out of like an awful thing happens, and you just go right there. And sometimes another thing that's also true when terrible things happen is that we're in some ways like denied the climax of tragedy, and we're left in the ongoingness of life. And that is sort of like absurd and banal and heroic all at once. And that tone of like keeping on going was something I was interested in exploring. And that's not quite elegy either.
No, I definitely, that's really helpful and really interesting. But in your response too, you were using words like interested and curious about, and so there's this like objective engagement with the loss. And I guess part of me is wondering, like, you use so many different stances in the collection on and engaging with loss. So I don't want to simplify that at all. But like, were there ways in which emotion was what was driving you forward in these pieces, or did the poems come after a long period of silence and stillness, and at that point you were able to objectively engage and be curious about these things?
Yes, definitely after like in terms of my actual process, like a period of time of just not writing, just sort of being and synthesizing. And I hope that the book resonates emotionally, but I will just point out something that my therapist pointed out to me, which is that there are no emotion words in the book. Like, I mean, or maybe there's like one or two, but they're,
Emotion.
and like the name of an emotion.
Oh,
You know,
okay.
like
That's an emotion word.
well,
Okay, yeah.
well, like happy, sad, angry,
Yeah.
or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
so if there is a curiosity in my like creative work in general, it would be around like, how do you get people to feel by just, but not by talking about feelings, but by talking about what is.
You
Like
write,
almost like at a textural level. Yeah.
you write a book called Afterimage, and
Check.
right? I mean, but like, you know, like, I mean, this is something that you were just saying about the shock of loss, like a line like, she dies every day, right? That you end a poem with. You don't need emotion words to have the emotional charge that is absolutely there. Okay, we'll go on to another question. Okay. So can you talk about the title of the book? I love the title of this collection, and in the class we were talking about the difference between the word after image together, one word, versus the title of this collection, which is after image, and two words together. And so I'm gonna let you define after image, because there's a poem called After Image, but that is, like everything in a Jenny George poem, that space matters so much. And so I'm wondering if you could talk about your journey to that title and how you were thinking about it.
Yeah, so of course an after image, all one word, that's a real thing. And it's like, I associate that word mostly with like photography or optics. Like it's when the image of something remains after the stimulus is gone. And that word and concept really resonates with me, and I think it speaks to some of what's going on in the book. And yeah, but then I got excited about like basically what kind of meaning could get added by like that space, which definitely does matter, of course. It's almost like the title with the two words, you get the echo of the one word noun, but then you get something that's taking place over time. Yeah, so it's got, so that it adds chronology into it, and like also it feels to me like an interesting question, like, well, what is after image? Like, yeah, I mean that's something that I could think about a lot. So.
Yeah, and it actually just suggests what we were just talking about. There's the after, and then in that space, it seems like the work of the poet, and then the achievement of image that might speak to the after that's casting back. Yeah.
What did your students think about it? Like, what were their ideas about
it? They hated the title. They were really upset about it. Yeah.
Like, what were some of the insights that came out of the conversation? What'd they say?
Oh gosh, what were some of the insights that came out of that conversation? I mean, I think it was because, I mean, one of the things that happens is that the after image is acted out in the book, like when suddenly the dress of the person who has died is seen on someone else and walking across the street, and like that after image, or suddenly there's like a moment of memory in the apricot blossoms where the person is there, and so like the lingering of that image. But we talked about it in relationship to the very honed work of image making that is in this collection, and how and how it's a different kind of emotional charge. I hopefully that fairly starts to categorize some of the things that were said. We talked about it for a long time, maybe ad nauseum, I don't know, but I got really excited about that space in there. I also want to turn to the fact, it's amazing that your therapist read your collection of poems. That's really wonderful. You have a great therapist. Yeah. As a quick aside, yeah, it suddenly just strikes me that that's a therapist doing good work. Yeah, shout out. So can we talk about the Orpheus poems? So it's great. I'm so glad you told the story already about going over to see the Louise Nevelson sculpture. But I'm not sure I know this. So the way that worked with poets who were being commissioned to write about work in our really incredible collection over there at the museum is we typically would maybe pull aside some things that we thought might work for them. I think you may have requested it, or maybe I sent you some some images and you requested it. But this is really a question about artistic process here. So you request to see this Louise Nevelson, which was also like such a joy for me to go also like backstage, so to speak, at the museum and see these objects really close up without any glass there and things like that. But when you requested that sculpture, did you already feel some sort of, was it all intuitive that you were drawn to it, or did you feel a kind of tug on your sleeve? Were you already thinking ahead in terms of the imagination about what the motif and myth of Orpheus and Eurydice might afford you in your own thinking about grief and loss, or was that something also like really hard-earned that came down the road?
Yeah, I think it came later, so it was not premeditated in terms of that choice around the commission. Um, I think the key in the lock was like, oh, you can you can use like a very well known story that's got like already tons of associations and adaptations in the world, and then like I think it just helped me see like, oh, I can use the scaffolding of this myth, and then I can be actually talking about my own experience or my own ideas. And it felt like, oh, to see the way that Louise Nevelson did that with using her material palette that was already hers. I think that was exciting. And then also the linking of the abstraction with the narrative. It was like one of those like tugs on the sleeve. And then, yeah, writing the piece for that anthology also, I thought, oh, I don't have to be done. We were talking about this with some students earlier. Like, oh yeah, you can, if you have a thing that you're on about, like, you don't have to just write one poem. Like, you can double down. Like, you can, you get to like follow through on your obsessions until they're just exhausted. And so I think writing that poem was like a door that opened for me in a number of ways. And then I felt like, oh no, there's more. There's more I think I can like feel into.
Yeah, one of the things that we were talking about in class was I had many science students who were very helpful to begin to explain to me things about quantum physics that I know nothing about. So we talked about the title of your poem, Quantum, and I'm going to botch this in terms of some of the things that were said, so please correct me afterwards or just shout out corrections as I'm saying it. But you know, that poem begins with, it's a table, right? Yeah. And I was thinking like the one small thing, but there were students who were talking about how in quantum physics, one of the things is that it is no one thing. It's constantly on the move, and one thing can become another thing. And that it seems like that was so important in relationship to, or one emblematic moment of that is happening there with the Orpheus poems too. That you couldn't just take one stance. That it's you had to have a poem from the point of view of Eurydice. You had to have Orpheus beheaded. You had to have Orpheus descending, ascending, all those things, and like all of those things together are what gets at the truth of what you're trying to say. Is that part of it?
That's so well said. Yeah, that there's like a,
I don't know if it was well said, but like I'm fumbling after something here.
yeah, like a fundamental uncertainty, and that like that I think poems that can express that deep truth, that like multiple things can be true at once, or multiple times can be occurring at once, like that kind of like not certain but deeply true, I think is the thing I was hoping for.
Yeah, the pivot of the lens with that myth also, it definitely relates to me to all the different, it's not a stance on death, but it's a way of approaching it. Does that make sense? Like I was thinking about the poem you read tonight, the kindnesses of death. I assume that was late in the collection. Was that, yeah, that, yeah, hard-earned and much later in the process, but like all the different ways you're angling in, and that it couldn't be, there's not just one poem that's going to get you there. And yeah.
Also, it's very exciting to me when something is true, but its opposite is also true. Like, and that might be everything. Or I'm actually not sure now, but there's some hunch that I think is getting explored in this collection. That's like, life and death are not opposites exactly, or they're co-phenomena, or like birth and death are really related, or just something that's about like, the kindnesses of death, which is imagining the life that's in death, or something like that. Like that kind of bothness. I think when that's happening in a poem, I usually like sit up pretty straight.
We all just did. I want to ask you about the Jenny George poems. um, so you, Jenny George, you're there. You're listening for the wind. You're wanting to activate the wind chimes, and suddenly you find yourself titling a poem Jenny George. That's probably not what happened there, but like, could you just talk through how that series of poems? I mean, there's three, or are there many more Jenny George poems?
Keep it at 3.
Okay.
Well, but they're all Jenny George poems. I mean, that's part of the
Right,
joke.
right, you're right. Yeah, but what for you? What led you to that poems, and what was your experience as you wrote that first Jenny George poem?
I mean, at a technical level, like this is like for the students that are working on a chapbook or putting together a collection of poems. I I had an assessment of the manuscript in progress before those poems came into being. That was like, I'm worried this collection is a little too high. Like I had a bunch of mythological references, and I didn't want it to like float off into the ether. And so I wanted something that would be a kind of ballast, like to compensate for the more maybe grandiose gestures in the book. I wanted something that was just like right there on the ground, like that would be like a different compensatory move to writing about Orpheus and Eurydice and the kind of grandness of that. So I had an eye towards wanting that in the collection, that like tone in the collection. And then, it might be one of those things that was just like a lucky intuitive move. And it might have been something like, okay, I've got these persona poems, like what other persona poems could I have? And then that kind of moment of like, but they're all kind of persona poems. And so when I wrote that first one, well, I'll tell you that the feeling I had was I felt embarrassed. And like the kind of embarrassment that's like, when you're like simultaneously humbled and spotlit. It's like which is which I think is actually a pretty good place in writing. Is not comfortable, but that thing where you're like, it's almost like seeing myself a little too clearly. And so that there was that moment of embarrassment, and then there was my higher level writer mind that was like, that's actually probably a little good. That's probably something worth sticking around for, even though it's an uncomfortable feeling. And in my first book, there were a number of poems about pigs, and I recognized something from my writing process a long time ago when I wrote the first pig poem that ended up in that collection. I wrote this poem about pigs, and then I looked at the draft and I had the thought, I should probably hide this. Like I should maybe hide this. Like this is weird. And then I ended up doing the opposite of that, writing a bunch more, and I think they were an important part of the collection. And so I recognized that like feeling from like, I think that's actually, I'm onto something.
Yeah, and there's so there are aspects of those poems that are very funny, and then there are aspects of those poems that are devastating for different ways, I think, in the collection. And it does seem to, what did you call us? What you say we're bozos bumbling around? Was that the word you used? Okay, but I, yes, definitely agree with that. Yeah, no argument. But part of the specific bozo-ness of being that those poems seem to want to explore is that of the poet specifically and the poet's task. And so there's that every page on the book has many probably honed images after image after image. And then there's this questioning of like, what is this Jenny George up to as they continue to unfurl these incredible these images?
Yeah.
That's not a question,
yeah.
but is there anything more you want to say? Like, I think the misgivings are really important for the collection. Can you just talk about that?
Yeah. I mean, to be perfectly frank, I definitely had the thought when I was working on some of these poems, which was sort of like, where do I get off talking about this? Yeah. Also in a very concrete way, like, how do I talk about death, well, I haven't died yet. You know, like how do you talk about a thing which you haven't actually lived through? If you can say death is something you live through. So there was that sort of just like shame, kind of, or that's not quite the right word, but there was that sense of like, am I allowed to do this? Or like, am I up to this task? And I knew that I wanted to, but I experienced a lot of that level of doubt, which is not like small doubt, like, is this good enough type of doubt, but like, oh, like, can I be responsible to this? And so I think instead of just tormenting myself with that question, I tried to put it in the poems.
Yeah. Yeah, I love those pieces. I mean, I could have read a whole book of them.
How do you think they're funny? I think they're funny, too.
I do. I want to make sure we talk about form at least once. I mean, I've read reviews of the book that have talked about like the use of the sonnet in the book, but I'm interested in the poems too that brush shoulders with the sonnets but aren't quite sonnets. Like over the years, I feel like I've gotten better at, like, I see a poem on a page, I'm think, oh, that's a sonnet. But many, many times in this collection, I think, oh, that's a sonnet, and then I count up the lines, and it's 13 lines, or it's 15 lines, and it's speaking towards sonnetness, but is deliberately evading the sonnet. So is that something that you're consciously orchestrating as you're like moving forward with the drafts of a piece, or how are you thinking about the sonnet relationship to those non-sonnet pieces?
I wish I had a better answer for this than like I just don't feel a strong allegiance to the form, like enough to override my other impulses about like, I think the poem ends here, or I think I could say another thing. So I was going for a certain kind of repeated container, and I think a sonnet is one of the all-time great containers. And I liked that feeling of it being sort of like a block of text and the tension of the compression of emotion into a kind of like chunk of language. But then when it came to it, I would just be like, but I'm gonna do it this way. So I wasn't too like rigorous. That's why they're not all 14
all right,
lines.
there's no way anyone who's read this book knows that you cannot call them not rigorous poems.
I mean, not formally rigorous.
Yeah. Okay.
But I was like influenced, yes, but also like I think I care more about the sentiment than the form.
Okay. Yeah. I hope we have time for just a couple more questions. But one of them, and I meant to ask this right after we talked about Jenny George. So you told a really wonderful story today in Tiana Clark's class, visiting students, talking about your origins as a poet and the moment you knew that you were really ready to be a poet. Would you mind telling that story? It's a great story. Yeah. I'm going to build it up.
Okay. Go and this is going to be permanently forever on YouTube?
Forever.
I did think I wanted to be a scientist when I was growing up.
Wait, are you telling the science story, or are you telling the third grade story? Two stories.
Okay, good.
No, wait. Now everyone's going to ask about the science story. I wasn't gonna do that, but now you have to talk. So you can talk in whatever order you want about the third grade poem or the time you falsified scientific data, which I was not going to ask you to do here.
That's the part I was hoping wouldn't be on YouTube
but
forever.
You led us that way.
I was really interested in like the deep nature of things and like how the world works, and and the natural world. And so I thought that being a scientist, a biologist, would be a really good way to spend time with those questions. And I went to a really small undergraduate college that specialized in field science, so that I could be right out like in the forest, on the beach, instead of in a lecture hall. And well, first of all, it turns out I get sick on boats, so the marine biology part wasn't gonna fly. But then also I did a summer internship where I was stationed in a bird blind, like a little tiny hut on stilts with a little slit, and I was right on the coast, and I was supposed to be counting birds, and that data was going to the National Fish and Wildlife Service. And I spent the whole time in that little bird blind, like writing poems in my field notebook, and then falsifying the data, like broadly. Like I would look out the little slit at the end and be like, 50. and but so that's terrible, and don't do that. But I'm glad that I had the wherewithal in that moment to be like, I don't think my passion is for the. It's clearly not for the data, and I don't think it's really even for the answers. Like that's probably the moment where I was like, oh, I think I like the experience of asking. I'm not so sure I care enough about the answer to the question, and that told me that literature and philosophy might be a better pathway for like getting to spend time with questions. I also want to say that I think now I understand that there are absolutely ways to be a scientist that are much more reverent with the questions, and I just don't think I had the wherewithal to know that could happen, so I switched. So that was a moment where I switched my academic career.
And I wasn't going to force it out of you, but do you feel better now that you've unburdened yourself? Yeah, okay. I think we're about out of time, and I want to make sure that everyone has time to talk to Jenny and sign books. But can you? I don't want to end on a note of you falsifying data. This is an incredibly trying time that we're in now, and so I wonder if you just could talk about things that you are finding solace in, things that are helping you through this moment. Yeah, anything you would want to talk about on that front?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you. I guess I would say, well, the first thing I would say is that I'm not okay. Like, yeah, like I'm upset all the time. And so yes, there's things that sustain and that bring solace, but also I'm not okay. It's not okay. So just to name that before it's like talking about how we can all feel better. And the things that bring me solace are probably what you would imagine, working in my garden and seeing my friends and having meals together. And I feel I'm not totally sure that poetry is one of those things. I go in and out of that conviction. Yeah, so I'm just copping to my ambivalence. Sometimes I'm not so sure that that's poetry that is going to do it. I guess I do turn to poetry in times like this, in this time particular, for its capacity to keep my senses alive, and I'm not sure that's solace, but it feels like it's important. Like one of the projects of empire is to sort of deaden our senses so that we are like more obedient subjects and we're better consumers, and one of the projects of poetry is to awaken our senses and to keep us in the world, I guess I would say. And so because a person who is like absolutely alive to the world is much less likely to stand for its ruin. So I think that like poetry can do that, and so I'm not sure that's solace, but that is good stuff. Yeah.
Can we get another round of applause for Jenny George? Jenny, thank you so much for being here. Jenny will be up here signing books. Please come by and also just say hello. Thank you so much for coming.